They get me ready for surgery. They start the IV. Wheel me down the hall. I said goodbye to my wife. They burst open the doors of the surgery room. And I thought, man, it's freezing in here. But, I'm still 104 fever. They slide me over onto the surgical table. I look to my right, and out of nowhere, Jesus is standing there. The physical person. And everything else just kind of disappeared. There were no other people in the room. And I look and I'm like really confused. I'm thinking, what is going on here? And then I thought to myself, did I die? And I thought, I've heard of people when they die, they see themselves floating up above their body. And I thought, I didn't do that, so I must not be dead. But what's going on? It wasn't like it was a dream. It was like heightened reality. And it started right when Jesus stood there. Everything was different. My name is Mike McKinsey. I grew up in Lodi, California, the Zinfandel capital of the world. When I got married, we moved down to Southern California. I was working as a salesman for a tile company, and I did really well. I was like one of the top salesmen in the company. And so they gave me a store of my own in Anaheim. So that's what I did till my wife got pregnant. Then we decided to move back up to Central California and raise a family up there. We ended up raising 4 kids, and they were all real athletic. They all played sports, did a lot of coaching of soccer and football and baseball especially. I think over about a 19-year coaching career, I coached over 30 different teams, everything from T-ball to high school. My oldest son, Ben, was going to school in Santa Barbara. He graduated. He got his license to be a nuclear medicine technologist. And he met someone in church, and they decided to get married. It was the last weekend of summer before the younger kids had to go back to school. Wedding was set for a Saturday. We thought we'd go down there on a Wednesday because, we wanted to kind of make it a short little mini vacation, say goodbye to summer and, before the kids go back to school. So we got there on a Wednesday afternoon. And of course, my 2 younger boys brought their wiffle balls and bats, and they saw this big park right next to the hotel. So the kids said, "Hey, Dad, we're gonna go play some home run derby. Why don't you come and join us after you get checked in?" So I said, "Yeah, okay, sounds good." And we played baseball, just hung out and played for probably a couple hours. That night, I started feeling like I was getting sick, like I was coming down with the flu. And I thought, great time to get a flu right before your son's wedding. Didn't think much of it because it wasn't that bad. But then Thursday, I just kept thinking, man, my stomach's getting worse and worse. This ain't good. Friday rolls around. By now, I'm running a little bit of a fever, and I'm starting to sweat. We made it through the rehearsal dinner, and I was joking around with some of the guests. I said, I'm getting the flu, but this thing's costing me a lot of money. So I'm going to have one of every dessert. I'm having your leftovers, and, I'm getting my money's worth. We left. We went back to the hotel. My son and I are sitting at the bar. He's in the medical field, so he's trying to diagnose what's going on with me. And he says, "Have you had your appendix out?" And I said, "Well, I don't think it's my appendix because they always say you have that point tenderness, like when your appendix swell up, there's one spot on your abdomen that you push on and it hurts really bad." That didn't happen with me. But I thought, it just didn't make sense. I decided at about 1 a.m. to go to Quick Stop and get some Tylenol, kind of break that fever. So I came back home, took the stuff, and it didn't work. The Tylenol cut the pain a little bit, but I was still running a pretty good fever. Now I'm sweating pretty bad. I didn't sleep at all that night, not 1 week before my son's wedding. I was starting to look pretty pale. We get through the whole wedding, and then a few of the guests start leaving, and I said, guys, I gotta go get checked out. I mean, something's really bad wrong. So we drove to the hospital. I finally get back to see the nurse in the ER, and she takes my temperature. It was 104.3. I was feeling just miserable. I mean, miserable. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. And she's poking around on my abdomen. She says, does that hurt? And I said, no, it doesn't. And she takes out this little mallet, like what they check your reflexes with. She taps on the bottom of my foot. And she says, does that hurt? And I kind of laughed. I said, no. And she tapped the other foot. And man, the pain in my abdomen made me scream. And she says, okay, that's your appendix. I'm going to call a surgeon. She says, have you done any physical activity lately? And I said, oh, I played baseball with the kids Wednesday afternoon. And her expression changed. She says, Wednesday? This is Saturday night. And she's thinking Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 3 days. If my appendix ruptured when I was playing baseball, 3 days later, I'm in trouble. About a half an hour later, a surgeon comes in. He says, your white blood cell count is really high. So I think your appendix have probably ruptured. And he says, if they ruptured, Wednesday, we got to get in there quick. They get me ready for surgery. They start the IV. They wheel me down the hall. I said goodbye to my wife. They burst open the doors of the surgery room. And I thought, man, it's freezing in here. But, I'm still 104 fever. And I was sweating, but I thought, gosh, it's so cold. I mean, how do these people work in this condition? They slide me over onto the surgical table, and I thought, this thing is tiny. I'm going to fall out. I felt like I had nowhere to put my hands. I looked to my right, and out of nowhere, Jesus is standing there. The physical person, and everything else just kind of disappeared. There were no other people in the room. And I look and I'm like really confused. I'm thinking, what is going on here? And then I thought to myself, did I die? And I thought, I've heard of people when they die, they see themselves floating up above their body. And I thought, oh, I didn't do that, so I must not be dead. But what's going on? It wasn't like it was a dream. It was like heightened reality. And it started right when Jesus stood there. Everything was different. His skin was much darker than I'd seen as a kid. He almost looked like an Arab man. He was wearing a white robe. He had like wavy brown hair, and he had these dark greenish blue eyes. And when those eyes looked into my eyes, he looked into my soul. I could just feel this love emanating from this man. That was what convinced me that it was Jesus. Everything about him just radiated love. He holds out his hand and he says, I want to answer your prayer. And I'm thinking, my prayer? What the heck? I didn't make the connection right away, but I thought, I used to pray as a kid that Jesus would show me heaven. I remember my grandfather passed away, and he was a Catholic, so we went to his funeral, and there was a priest up there, and he was holding this ball on a chain, and it had holes in it, and there's smoke coming out of it. And the smoke's going up, and the priest says, the smoke represents our prayers going up to heaven. They were talking about Grandpa's in heaven now. There's no more pain. There's no sadness. There's no tears. And I remember thinking as a kid, wow, sounds like a great place, I'd like to see that. I reached out, I took his hand. Immediately, when I took his hand, we were standing on a hill. Everything around me is white, like the whitest white I've ever seen. It's almost blinding. But I look down at my feet, and I'm barefoot. I'm still in a nightgown, the surgical gown. And I see this beautiful green grass. It's like it's manicured, it's perfect. It's bluish green, prettiest grass I've ever seen. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass under my feet. I could feel every blade of grass. I knew how many blades of grass were touching my feet. It was crazy. And I look around, I'm trying to adjust my eyes to this white so I can see. And I look, and off to my right is another brighter white, but this is like a light. And I look at that light and I think, wow, that's really cool, And all of a sudden, out of that light, it starts sending these light beams. They look like fluorescent light tubes, like you use in your shop, the 4-foot things. But they're only about 2 feet long. They're about this big around. They're smooth, and they're glowing like the light. And so they start flying by me here. And everything is white, but these things are glowing white, almost like shimmering. It's weird. When I was looking at this, I was just in awe. And, obviously confused. Still, I spent a lot of time confused because I'm thinking, what is this? Where am I? And I'm watching these things, and one of them is coming straight at my head. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Should I dodge this thing or what? It hits me right in the forehead. And as it does, it makes this kind of buzzing sound, a light buzzing sound as it goes through me. And it warmed me, like all the way down to my feet. So that cold that I felt in the surgical room now is replaced with this beautiful, warm feeling. All of a sudden, it's like somebody is pulling a curtain from my right to my left. And the white, whatever it was, the white fog or veil or just the whiteness just gets pulled to the side. And now I'm looking at this beautiful scenery. I see that I am standing on a hill. Below me are these little flowers. They're almost like, describe them like sweet peas. Like they have like these little, they're like little petals, little soft petals, but they're all like a pastel color. They're purples and yellows and orange and pinks and just beautiful. And they're moving like they're dancing in the wind, but there's no wind. So I'm thinking, well, why are they moving? And then at the bottom of this hill, the white that was pulled away from me is now settled in the valley. And there's a great big city down there. But I can only see the rooftops because it's like there's fog on top of the city. So I can't see the whole city, but I can just see the rooftops. And there's one real big gold dome, like a Capitol dome. And there's other smaller gold domes. I mean, the city's huge. It's like miles apart. And there's some other white things sticking through, almost like church steeples, like spires. Behind that city, on the other side of the valley, there's another mountain, and it's pretty big. And it's covered in these pine trees, but they're like perfectly shaped pine trees. They're all beautiful green. And then above that is like the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen. Right above the trees, it was like reds and oranges and yellows. And then it turned into the purples and greens and blue, like bright blue at the very top. And so now these tube lights are still bouncing around, going by me, but now they're going across the valley. And one of them goes and it hits the edge, the tip of one of the trees. And it's like it had a diamond on it, because when that thing hit the tip of the tree, it burst into hundreds of tiny little light streaks. And pretty soon, the whole mountain is lit up with these bursting white beams of light. And they kept going too. They would go all over the place. I mean, it was like a big giant fireworks show, but it was all white, like glowing fluorescent white. You know, I'm just looking at it, just going, this is amazing. And when I look back at the light where they were starting from, emanating from, Jesus says to me, it's the glory of the Lord. And when he said that, I just got weak in my knees. And I fell to my knees. And the instant my knees hit the ground, they shocked me and they brought me back. So now instead of this beautiful scenery, I've got a doctor leaning over me wearing a mask. And he says, do you know your name? I opened my mouth to talk and my mouth was just so dry. But I was able to get out the words, Mike. And he says, oh, good. He says, do you know where you are? And now I'm confused again because I'm thinking, well, where's Jesus? Where's heaven? Where's the scene? You know? And he says, again, do you know where you are? And I'm running through my mind, okay. Oh, the wedding. Oh, yeah, I'm in Ventura. So I said, Ventura. And he looks at me and he says, okay. And he says something to the people in the room. And now I realize that there's like 5 other people in the room, all dressed in scrubs. He says, he's going to be okay, or he's back, something like that. And and he says, let's get him up to ICU. I looked over and I saw the crash cart, and I saw that one of the paddles was kind of laying aside and the cords were hanging down, and it was obvious that they had used it. Somebody was over there putting them back together, and I thought, oh boy, I did die. The surgeon came in to see me the next day as he's kind of checking out the stitches and, poking around and checking my temperature. He says to me, that's the worst case I've ever seen. And I said, you're kidding. And he starts to walk out of the room, and he comes back in and he says, I've seen worse, but they didn't live. And he says, yours was the worst case I've ever seen where the patient lived. My wife came in to see me a couple hours after that. She said, how are you feeling? And I said, well, not so good yet, But I said, you're not going to believe what happened. She goes, really? What? And I opened my mouth to tell her, and I just started crying. And I thought, I'm not even going to try and tell her about this whole thing with Jesus yet. So the next day she comes in and she says, so what happened? And I opened my mouth to tell her, and I cried again. And it took me 3 days before I could finally tell her the whole story. And, makes me cry at this point. It was really just a super emotional thing. When I told her, of course, she starts crying, and I thought, it's really an amazing thing that happened to me. It's an emotional story for me because I think that really started a relationship with Jesus. I would describe myself as kind of a Sunday Christian. I went to church on Sundays. I just didn't really get it. After that incident, I knew he's a real guy. He's a real physical person. I mean, that changed everything that I know or thought I knew about heaven. And I thought, well, maybe it really is a physical place like right now. God could just hide it from us. I mean, God could do anything. I was on a liquid diet for probably 6 days. I was still running a fever, and until you get down to normal, they're not going to let you go. And so at some point, the doctor said, okay, put him on semi-solid food. Let's see how he does. So one of the first things he gave me to eat was a banana. And I thought, okay, finally I get something other than beef broth, because I spent 12 days in the hospital. I lost 34 pounds. I was a rail. So I was so happy to get that banana. And as I start peeling this banana, it's like God's creation just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I start bawling. And I'm thinking, I'm eating something that grew out of the ground, out of the dirt, from thousands of miles away, and it's going to help me get healthy again. It was like the weight of that creation just hit me. Walking's big in the hospital. After you've had surgery, they want you on your feet. And I remember the nurse comes in and he says, I need you to get up and walk. Today's the day you're going to walk. So he helps me out of bed, and I had 4 different tubes on the IV stand. I had tubes coming out of me that I didn't know they could put tubes in. It was crazy. So I get out of bed, I take my little IV stand, and I start walking down the hall, and the guy's helping me, the nurse. And I walk by a couple of pictures, and this was a beach town. So there's pictures of the ocean, there's pictures of sunsets. And man, I remember looking at those and I'm thinking, what have I been missing? I'm just so stressed out. And it just changed everything. Changed the way I look at life. Here's the way I describe my life before the NDE. I'd go to work early in the morning, very stressful job. I was a superintendent for a real estate development company, and I had between 30 and 35 houses at different stages of construction. I would come home, I would throw the baseball equipment or whatever in the back of the truck, race off to a baseball game or practice, and somewhere along the line try and figure out where we're gonna get dinner, because we'd get done at 6:30. Kids had homework, that I had to help them with. And it was just lather, rinse, repeat every day. Same old thing, stress. One of the biggest changes for me after that NDE was I put into practice what I noticed in the hallways, walking back and forth and looking at those pictures. I thought, I'm just gonna slow down, I'm gonna stop, and I'm gonna enjoy every moment of my life. I'll be walking through a park or something, I'll see a flower, I'll bend down and smell the flower. I don't care who sees me or if they think it's weird or whatever. My phone is full of sunset pictures, full of pictures of flowers. I think I'm more like seeing the world through the eyes of a kid. Jesus didn't give me an assignment, but I think that's what he wants me to do, is tell everybody, slow down. Man, just appreciate the beauty of his creation. I think that's why we're created, to spread God's love. I'm nothing special. I'm not loved more by God than anybody. I always tell people now, ask God to reveal himself to you, and he will. But be patient, because this one took 40 years. This prayer took 40 years to answer. But what's 40 years to God? Definitely not afraid of death. I always think now, when I do die for the final time and don't come back, I think Jesus is going to meet me on that hill. And he's going to say, let's go see what you didn't get to see that day. Let's spend some time in the city. I'll show you around. But I always say, but not today, not yet. Because there's a lot of life to live, I have 13 grandkids. If I would have died back then, I wouldn't have met any of them. But I think that's probably why he let me live.